At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin.
Suyix's breath came in labored bursts as he rushed into the royal garden, his grip tight around the yellow vial, the antidote to the deadly deathberry a human guest had apparently ingested during his visit to the planet. As the royal doctor, Suyix hadn't run this hard since the night the queen went into labor more than 20 years ago. And now, here he was again, sprinting through corridors and across old stone paths. All because some foolish visitor had decided to eat a deathberry. The garden entrance loomed before him, an archway of twisted silver vines that opened into the vast expanse of the royal grounds. Suyix stumbled through, his legs burning, his lungs screaming for air. He pressed one hand against the cool stone of the archway and doubled over, sucking in desperate breaths. The yellow vial felt slick with sweat in his other hand, and he clutched it tighter, terrified he might drop the only thing standing between life and death for their guest. The royal garden stretched before him like a small world unto itself. Crystalline pathways wound between towering sculptures of ancient heroes, past beautiful fountains, through groves of bluish trees whose leaves rustled like whispered secrets. The garden was easily 3 times the size of the medical wing, a labyrinth of beauty and prestige that had taken generations to cultivate. How in the name of the ancestors was he supposed to find one human in all of this? Suyix straightened, still breathing hard, and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His tentacles, normally a dignified arrangement atop his head, hung limp and disheveled from the run. Think, he told himself. Think rationally. This was what he was trained for. Assessment, analysis, action. Then it struck him how utterly stupid his moment of panic had been. Unlike the Zedeans, with their blue skin marked with elegant white strikers, unlike his own people with their pointed ears and tentacles that crowned their heads like living jewelry, the human would be completely different. Humans had hair, a kind of fur growing from their scalps instead of the sensory tentacles that allowed the Suyix and his kind to feel subtle changes in air pressure and temperature. Their ears were round and small, almost comically inadequate compared to the graceful points that marked nobility among his people. And their skin, pale or dark in various shades, but never the cool blues and purples that dominated this planet. The human would stand out among the bluish leaves of the garden like the deathberry itself. Those cursed red fruits that grew wild in certain parts of the royal grounds, kept as a reminder of nature's dangers and the importance of knowledge. Even the youngest children knew to stay away from them. Their bright crimson color was nature's warning, a beacon that screamed poison to anyone with basic survival instincts. Unlike some human, apparently, who had no self-preservation instinct whatsoever. Suyix's gaze swept across the garden, his eyes sharpening. The western side was quiet. Just the usual gardeners tending to the luminous night blooms. The northern section showed a few courtiers strolling along the reflecting pools. The southern, there, the eastern side of the garden. A cluster of people, maybe a dozen of them, all gathered in a tight circle. Even from this distance, Suyix could see the agitated movements, the way they crowded together with the kind of focused attention that meant something was very wrong, or very interesting. With deathberries or humans involved, probably both. Suyix broke into a run again, his medical bag slapping against his hip with each stride. The yellow vial remained clutched in his fist like a lifeline. His mind raced through the symptoms of deathberry poisoning. Respiratory failure, neural degradation, complete systemic collapse within minutes of ingestion. How long it had been since the human ate the berry? How much time did they have left? "Move! Medical emergency!" he shouted as they approached the crowd. Several people turned, their expressions showing their curiosity. They parted like water, creating a path that led directly to the center of their attention. And there, sitting casually on a small decorative rock as if he didn't have a care in the universe, was the human. He was male. That much was immediately obvious. He had blonde hair and a beard covered the lower half of his face. Neatly trimmed, but distinctly alien to Suyix's eyes. His people didn't grow facial hair, and seeing it always seemed strange, like someone had glued plant matter to their chin. The human wore simple clothes, practical rather than formal, and in his hand was a bunch of deathberries, not just one, a whole cluster of them, bright red and glistening. And as Suyix watched, frozen in shock, the human popped another one into his mouth. "Here's the antidote!" Suyix screamed, his voice reaching a pitch he didn't know he was capable of. He thrust the yellow vial forward like a weapon, like a ward against death itself. The human turned to look at him, chewing thoughtfully. His eyes, a strange blue color, regarded Suyix with mild curiosity. He swallowed, and Suyix felt his heart skip a beat. "Antidote for what?" the human asked, his tone genuinely confused. Suyix froze. His arm was still extended, the vial still held out like an offering. His mouth opened, and no sound came out. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, everyone watching the exchange with rapt attention. The human looked at him for another moment, then shrugged. "A weird guy, that one," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, as casually as someone might eat a snack at home, he turned away from Suyix and popped another deathberry into his mouth. Suyix stood there, still frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The human was eating deathberries, multiple deathberries, and he was fine. Not even a hint of distress, no signs of poisoning, no respiratory issues or neural degradation or any of the dozen fatal symptoms that should have manifested by now. The human chewed contentedly, reaching for another berry. That broke the spell. "Stop!" Suyix lurched forward, nearly dropping the vial in his haste. "Stop eating those immediately! Do you have any idea what you're doing? Those are deathberries! They're called deathberries! The name is not subtle!" The human paused with another berry halfway to his mouth. He looked at Suyix, then at the berry, then back at Suyix. "Yeah, I know what they are." You know?" Suyix's voice climbed another octave. "You know that they're poisonous, and you are eating them anyway. Are you trying to die? Is that some sort of human ritual? Because I assure you we have much better ways to commit ceremonial suicide if that is what you're after." "I'm not trying to die," the human said, looking slightly offended. He examined the berry in his hand. "These are actually pretty good. Sweet, with a kind of tart aftertaste. Reminds me of cherries from Earth." "Pretty good." Suyix could feel his tentacles starting to twitch with agitation. "They are lethal. One berry should have killed you within minutes, and you've eaten." He looked at the stems in the human's other hand, counting quickly. "At least 3. You should be dead. You should be very, very dead." The human shrugged again, that infuriatingly casual gesture that seemed to dismiss everything Suyix was saying. "Well, I ain't dead. I mean, I feel fine. I feel great. These berries are delicious." "This is insane," Suyix muttered, running a hand over his face. His tentacles were now writhing independently, a clear sign of extreme stress that he was usually better at controlling. "This is absolutely insane. How are you not dead?" "Maybe just because humans are built different," the human offered helpfully. "Built different? Built different? Okay, Suyix wanted to laugh, or scream, or possibly both. "Look, Doc, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Really." The human stood up from his rock, brushing off his pants. He was tall, Suyix noticed. Taller than most of his people. "I've been eating these for a couple of days now, and nothing bad's happened." "A couple of... Suyix felt his legs go weak. "You've been eating them for days. How many days? How many berries?" The human scratched his beard, thinking. "Well, I started small. It was just a test, you know. I'm not crazy." "You're eating deathberries!" Suyix protested. That's the definition of crazy. No, I was careful about it. The human held up a finger, as if he was about to explain something perfectly reasonable. On my first day here, I noticed that these berries are growing in a few spots around the garden. They looked interesting, but I'm not stupid. I know not to just eat random alien plants, so I did a test. A test? Suyix repeated flatly. Yeah, proper test. Now first, I rubbed a little bit of the juice on my lips. The human gestured to his mouth. Waited an hour, no reaction, no burning, no numbness, no swelling. That's the first stage of the universal edibility test. Suyix blinked. The universal what? Edibility test. It's a survival technique from Earth. You test the plant in stages. First, skin contact, then lip contact, then tongue, then small amount swallowed, and so on. Each stage, you wait to see if there is a reaction, and if you can get through all of those stages without problems, the plant's probably safe to eat. Probably safe. Suyix's voice was getting higher again. Those are deathberries. They're not probably anything. They're definitely poisonous. Well, not to me, apparently. The human popped another berry into his mouth with a satisfied smile. After the lip test went fine, I waited until yesterday, and then I ate half a berry. Waited a few hours, felt perfectly normal, no nausea, no dizziness, no weird symptoms at all. And the taste, that was amazing. And so today I just decided to go all in. Suyix stared at him. The reasoning was sound, annoyingly sound. The methodology was actually a legitimate approach to testing unknown substances. It was cautious, systematic, and showed a clear understanding of basic toxicology principles. But that just raised an entirely different question. Why? Suyix asked, his voice suddenly quiet. The crowd around them leaned in, equally curious. Why would you go through all of this? Why risk your life testing poisonous berries when... He gestured broadly at the palace looming behind him. When you're a guest of honor, the royal family has imported foods from Earth specifically for you. I know they have, because I approved the medical safety reports myself. You have access to anything that you could possibly want to eat. So were you starving? Were you lost in the forest? Why in the name of all of the ancestors would you decide to eat those deathberries? The human's expression shifted. He looked down at the berries in his hand, then back up at Suyix. For the first time, he seemed a bit uncomfortable. Do I have to answer that? Yes, human! Suyix practically shouted. Yes, you absolutely have to answer that. I ran across half the palace, gave myself muscle cramps I'm going to feel for days. It probably took 10 years off my life from stress. Least you can do is tell me why. I'm tired of being called the human all the time, the man said suddenly. My name is Brandon Cox. Brandon. Not the human, not the Earth representative, not the strange visitor. Brandon Cox. Suyix took a breath, trying to calm himself. All right, Brandon. I am Dr. Suyix Kalema, royal physician and apparently the person responsible for making sure you don't accidentally kill yourself. Now, Brandon Cox, why are you here eating deathberries? Brandon shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Can this fall under doctor-patient confidentiality? Doctor-patient Suyix paused. That was actually a legitimate question. He wasn't technically Brandon's physician, but he had brought the antidote, and in many ways this was a medical consultation, however bizarre. Yes, he said finally. Yes, medical confidentiality applies. Now please, explain. Brandon glanced around the crowd of onlookers, then back at Suyix. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I just wanted to impress someone. You wanted to... Suyix stopped, processing this. Impress someone? By eating poison? Well, not them, Brandon said quickly, gesturing at the guards and courtiers who had gathered. Someone else. Someone important. And the berries, they seemed like a good idea at the time. You know? Look at me. Agony to things that will kill you. Aren't humans interesting and brave? You know, that kind of thing. For a long moment, Suyix just stared at them. Then, something inside him snapped. "Are you telling me," he said, his voice dangerously low, "that you caused a palace-wide emergency? Made the guards summon me on my day off? Forced me to sprint across the entire royal grounds like some kind of undignified messenger? Gave me the worst scare of my professional career and risked your own life, all because you wanted to impress someone?" Brandon winced. When you put it that way. "I had plans," Suyix continued, his voice rising. "It was my first day off in 2 weeks. I was at home. I was actually resting for once, maybe going to read the book that I've been trying to finish for 3 months, when someone called in a panic saying that the human was dying from deathberry poisoning. So I grabbed the antidote, which took like 15 minutes to prepare, because it's not something exactly that we keep on hand, and I ran. I ran like my life depended on it. And when I get here, ready to save your life, I only discovered that you're some kind of freak who thinks that the berries taste really good." "I'm sorry," Brandon said, and he did actually sound apologetic. "I really am. But in my defense, it's not my fault the guards didn't believe me when I said I was fine." Suyix opened his mouth for another retort, then closed it. That was actually a fair point. He sighed, feeling the anger drain out of him, leaving only exhaustion. "Fine. You're right. The guards should have investigated further before calling me. But still, eating death berries? Like really?" "They're good berries," Brandon said with a small smile. Suyix rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "I'm going home. Okay, so enjoy your deadly snack, and try not to find anything else poisonous to eat." He turned and started walking away, the yellow vial of useless antidote still clutched in his hand. His tentacles hung limp with exhaustion, and he could feel every muscle in his legs protesting each step. All he wanted was to get home, take a long bath in the hot springs, and forget this entire ridiculous day ever happened. He was maybe 30 paces away, just reaching the edge of the crowd that was starting to disperse, when a hand grabbed his arm. Suyix jumped, nearly dropping the vial. He spun around to find the chief of the guards, a stern-faced woman named Kelrix, her white strikers particularly prominent against her blue skin in the fading light. Her tentacles were arranged in the formal military style, all discipline and control. "Dr. Killamar," she said, her voice low and urgent. "A moment of your time." Suyix tried to pull his arm back, but her grip was firm. "I need to go home and recover from this panic-inducing disaster, Chief Kelrix. Whatever this is, it can wait until tomorrow." "I'm afraid that it can't." She pulled him further away from the crowd, into the shadow of a large statue depicting the first king of their planet. When she was satisfied they were out of earshot, she released his arm, but moved to block his path. "I need to ask a favor." "A favor?" Suyix laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I just ran across the entire palace on my day off because of that human. I think I've done my favor for the day. For the week, actually." "I need you to keep an eye on him." Suyix stared at her. "Keep an eye on him? The human who eats deathberries for fun? Are you serious?" "Completely serious." Kelrix's expression didn't waver. "For the rest of his stay, just make sure he doesn't get into any trouble." "Any trouble?" Suyix felt his voice rising again. "He's already in trouble. He eats poison. What's next? Swimming in acid? Juggling live explosives? The man is a walking disaster." "Which is exactly why I need you to watch him." Kelrix crossed her arms. "Someone with medical knowledge who can respond quickly if needed." Suyix narrowed his eyes. Something didn't add up. Why all of this concern for someone so reckless? Prejudice aside, he's clearly capable of taking care of himself. Why does the guard care so much about one human? Kelritz's expression flickered. Just a tiny crack in her professional demeanor. "That's not important." "It's not important?" Suyix laughed again. "You're asking me to babysit a full-grown adult who thinks poison is a snack on my day off, and you won't even tell me why." Doctor. No! No, this is ridiculous. There's more going on here. The guard doesn't usually provide personal protection for visiting diplomats unless there's a significant threat, or... He paused, realization dawning. Or unless someone important has requested it. Someone very important. Calrix's jaw tightened. I can't discuss. Who asked you to protect him? Was it the king? The queen? Suyix studied her face, looking for tells. Calrix was good at controlling her expressions, but her tentacles were another matter. They moved a bit at the mention of the queen, then stilled. Not the queen then, but close, very close. The princess? The young one? Calrix's silence was answer enough. Stars above. Suyix muttered. The princess has taken an interest in the human. That's what this is about. I didn't say that. Calrix said quickly. He didn't have to. Suyix felt his headache intensifying. This was getting more complicated by the second. The younger princess, Aelara, was known for her, adventurous spirit. If she'd befriended the human and wanted to keep him safe, that would explain the heightened security response. It would also explain why Brandon had been eating deathberries. To impress someone important, someone royal. Oh, this was a disaster waiting to happen. I can't do this, Suyix said, shaking his head. I'm a physician, I'm not a bodyguard. You find someone else. There is no one else. Calrix stepped closer, her voice dropping even lower. Everyone else would ask too many questions or be too obvious. Well, I'm also exhausted, and this was supposed to be my day off. I will give you a full vacation after, Calrix said. 2 weeks, all expenses paid. Any resort that you want. The royal family will cover everything. Suyix paused. 2 weeks? At a resort? He couldn't remember the last time he'd taken more than 3 days off in a row. The idea was tempting. Very tempting. How long would I need to watch him? His visit is scheduled for another 3 days. 4 at most. 4 days for 2 weeks of vacation. Suyix calculated quickly. That was almost a 4-to-1 ratio. And honestly, how much trouble could the human get into in 4 days? Besides eating poisonous berries, which he apparently survived just fine. Fine, Suyix said finally, knowing he was going to regret this. Fine, I'll do it. But I want that vacation in writing. Done. Calrix actually smiled slightly. Thank you, Doctor. I knew you'd understand. As she walked away, Suyix stood there in the shadow of the ancient king, watching Brandon in the distance still chatting with some courtiers, probably regaling them with tales of how delicious deathberries were. His tentacles went rigid with stress. Who wanted to go through so much effort to keep this human alive? What was the princess thinking? And more importantly, what had Suyix just agreed to? He had a feeling the next 4 days were going to be very, very long. 3 hours later, Suyix was absolutely certain that he had made a terrible mistake. The marketplace was crowded. It always was at this time of evening, when the sun began its descent and the temperature cooled to something bearable. Stalls lined both sides of the ancient stone streets, their modern metal a clear contrast to the weathered walls that had stood for thousands of years. The market was a blend of old and new, tradition and innovation, much like the planet itself. And right now, Suyix hated every centimeter of it. The crowd was thick with his own people, their blue skin and white strikers creating a sea of familiar faces. Scattered among them were off-worlders, a few Torvians with their transparent skins, a group of Zelthans whose multiple arms made them excellent bartenders, and of course, Brandon, whose human features drew attention wherever he went. People stared, whispered, pointed. Off-worlders always attracted attention, but humans were still rare enough that Brandon might as well have been wearing a sign that said, "Look at me," which made Suyix's job of following him discreetly absolutely impossible. The stalls themselves offered everything imaginable. Alien technology from the outer sectors, Devices that promise to translate any language or predict weather patterns weeks in advance. Spices from dozens of worlds, their scents mingling into an overwhelming scent. Brandon seemed fascinated by everything, stopping at every third stall to examine something or ask questions. He haggled cheerfully with vendors, laughed at their jokes, and generally acted like he was on vacation, rather than being someone who needed protection from his own bad decisions. And Suyix? Suyix was trying very, very hard to blend into the crowd while keeping Brandon in sight at all times. It was not going well. The problem was that Suyix was terrible at being sneaky. He was a doctor, not a spy. His training involved diagnosis and treatment, not covert surveillance. Every time Brandon moved, Suyix had to follow, trying to maintain a casual distance while also keeping close enough to intervene if needed. But casual distances were hard to judge, and Suyix kept finding himself either too close, nearly running into Brandon's back at one point, or too far away, panicked that he'd lost sight of his charge. Now Suyix was approximately 10 paces away, attempting to look very interested in a display of polished stones from the mining colonies. He picked one up, pretended to examine it, then glanced at Brandon to make sure he was still there. Brandon was still there. Good. But then he started walking again. He looked around frantically for Brandon, his heart's pounding. Where was he? Had he moved while Suyix was not paying attention? Had something happened while Suyix wasn't watching? There, still at the same stall, now holding up some kind of multi-purpose device and examining it with interest. You know I can see you, right? Suyix froze. Brandon had put down the tool and was looking directly at him across the crowd. His expression was amused, one eyebrow raised in a very human gesture that Suyix was learning meant, I think you're being ridiculous. I don't know what you... Suyix started. You're terrible at this, Brandon interrupted, weaving through the crowd to stand next to him. You've been following me since I left the palace. You crashed into a pottery stall. Pretty sure everyone in the market heard that. You might as well just walk with me instead of lurking in the background like the world's most obvious spy. Suyix felt his face heat with embarrassment. His tentacles drooped. I wasn't... I was just... Shopping for stones and pottery at multiple stalls without buying anything while constantly looking over at me? Yeah. Brandon grinned. Come on, Doc. I'm from Earth. We invented surveillance movies. You're not subtle. Suyix sighed, defeated. Kelrix hadn't explicitly told him to keep his presence secret, and honestly, he was so done with playing spy. Fine. Yes, I was following you. Still don't believe that I'm fine after the berry thing? Brandon asked, but he didn't seem upset. If anything, he looked entertained. Actually, no. Well, I mean, yes, but... Suyix ran a hand over his face, noting that he now had plant sap on his hand too. Wonderful. Someone important is concerned about your safety, and I was asked to keep an eye on you during your visit. Make sure you don't get into any trouble. Suyix had expected anger, or at least annoyance at having his privacy invaded. Instead, Brandon's eyes widened, and his entire face lit up with excitement. Really? He breathed. Someone important? Yes, someone very... Suyix paused, really looking at Brandon's expression. This wasn't just excitement. That was hope. Recognition clicked into place. Oh no. Can I ask you something? Brandon leaned in, his voice dropping to a more private level despite the crowd around them. Medical advice? From someone who knows your species, well. What kind of advice? Suyix asked warily. Brandon glanced around, then met Suyix's eyes. What would be a good gift for, let's say, a female from a rich family who you're going to be meeting for the first time in person in a few hours? 3 seconds. That's all it took for the pieces to click together. The princess's insistence on keeping Brandon safe, Brandon's desperate attempt to seem impressive by eating death berries, the carefully casual way he'd been asking about gifts for a wealthy female, and the fact that his visit coincided with the harvest ceremony 2 days from now, a major social event where couples traditionally became official. Suyix wondered if this human had any idea what his princess might have in mind. Suyix leaned close to Brandon's ear, and he whispered,
"You and the younger princess."
"Yes," Brandon cut him off, grabbing Suyix's arms with both hands. His eyes were almost pleading. "We met through the Galactic Network, and we've been talking for like a full year. She's amazing, Doc. She's smart, she's funny, and she invited me here for the harvest ceremony, and I'm going to meet her tonight at this diplomatic gathering thing. And I have no idea what to bring her. What are your people like? What would impress her? I don't want to mess this up." Suyix stared at him. The human who had eaten death berries to impress a princess. Who had traveled across the galaxy to meet someone he'd only known through digital communications. Who was now looking at Suyix with such earnest hope that it was almost painful to witness.
"You're insane,"
Suyix said, but there was no heat in it.
"You know that, right? That this is completely insane?"
Is that a medical diagnosis? Despite everything, the ruined day off, the panic, the intensive running, Suyix found himself laughing.
"Come on,"
he said.
"I know a vendor who sells fruit from the outer colonies. They're rare, they're delicious, and most importantly, completely safe for my species. I verified the toxicity reports personally."
Brandon's face split into a huge grin. "You're the best, Doc."
"And you're paying?"
Suyix added. They made their way through the market together, no longer pretending Suyix wasn't there. It was easier this way, Suyix realized. He could actually focus on keeping Brandon safe instead of crashing into things or trying to be sneaky. The fruit vendor was an old friend, someone Suyix had worked with when verifying the safety of off-world foods for the palace. Her stall was a riot of colors and shapes, fruits from dozens of planets arranged in artistic displays. Some glowed from within. Others shifted colors as you watched. A few of them seemed to be alive, like an animal.
"Looking for anything specific, Doctor?"
the vendor asked, her tentacles gesturing welcomingly.
Something special,"
Suyix said.
"Something that would make a good gift for someone very important."
The vendor's expression sharpened with interest. She began pulling out specific fruits, describing each one. Suyix pointed out his personal favorites. A crystal fruit from the ice moons that tasted like frozen honey. A solar berry that was warm to the touch and had flavors that changed as you ate it. A nebula fruit that supposedly contained tiny edible stars. "I'll take all of them," Brandon said immediately. They spent the better part of an hour at the market after that, browsing various stalls. Suyix found himself actually enjoying it. The crowd, the conversations, the occasional haggling. Brandon was very easy company, enthusiastic and genuinely curious about everything they encountered. By the time they headed back toward the palace, the sun was beginning to set in earnest, painting the ancient stone in shades of gold and orange. Brandon carried his bag of exotic fruits carefully, treating them like precious cargo, which Suyix supposed they were. The gathering was being held in one of the smaller ballrooms, smaller being relative, as it could still hold over 200 people comfortably. The diplomatic reception was a regular event, a chance for off-world visitors to mingle with the local nobility and officials. It was usually boring, full of careful political conversation and overly formal etiquette. Tonight, it was likely to be anything but boring. They paused outside the grand doors, which were propped open to allow guests to filter in. Music drifted out, along with the murmur of conversation and the clink of glasses. Brandon stopped, staring into the room with an expression Suyix couldn't quite read.
"Are you okay?"
Suyix asked.
"How do I look?"
Brandon turned to him. He'd changed clothes since the market, trading his casual wear for a formal suit in Earth style. Black jacket, white shirt, black pants. It was a severely monochrome thing compared to the colorful formal wear of Suyix's people, but it was undeniably sharp.
"It's too human,"
Suyix said honestly. Brandon laughed. "Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. I am representing humanity, after all." He sobered slightly. "Can I still count on that medical confidentiality we talked about?"
"Technically, yes."
I'm not actually a diplomat, Brandon said, his voice low. I'm just a guy who made friends with a princess through the Galactic Network. She edited some files to put my name on the guest list for this reception, and I'm not supposed to be here representing Earth. I'm just here. Suyix looked at him, the human who had crossed the galaxy for a chance to meet someone in person, who had eaten poisonous berries trying to be impressive, who was now standing outside a royal reception in clothes from his homeworld, holding a bag of exotic fruit and looking terrified.
Of course the human who eats deathberries isn't a real diplomat,
Suyix said, shaking his head, but he was smiling.
You're going to fit right in with the royal family. They're all a little crazy too.
Brandon started to respond, but then his eyes locked on something beyond Suyix's shoulder. His expression transformed, fear melting into wonder, nervousness giving way to joy. Suyix turned to look. Princess Aelara was making her way across the ballroom toward them. She was unmistakable even in the crowd, taller than most, her tentacles arranged in the royal style with golden ornaments woven through them. She wore formal robes in deep purple, the color of royalty, and white strikers on her blue skin that seemed specially bright today. Her ears were pierced with multiple rings, each one marking an achievement or honor. She was beautiful by any standard. But more than that, she was confident, powerful, and she was looking directly at Brandon with an expression that matched his own. Pure, unguarded happiness.
Brandon,
she said as she reached them, her voice filled with joy.
You actually came!
I told you I would, Brandon replied. And Suyix could hear his voice shake a bit. Now, I brought you something. I know it's not much, but here. He held out the bag of fruit. Aelara took it, looking inside. Her eyes widened.
Solar berries? And nebula fruit? Brandon, these are incredibly rare.
Yeah, the doc helped me pick them out. He said they're safe for humans, too, so maybe we could share them sometime. She looked up from the bag, and her smile was radiant. Then she did something that made several nearby nobles gasp. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a restrained smile, but a full, genuine laugh of pure delight.
I knew you'd be perfect,
she said. Suyix watched them, the princess and the human, standing there looking at each other like they were the only two people in the universe. For just a moment, he could see it. They looked good together. She with her royal bearing, and he with his earnest enthusiasm. Blue skin and pale skin, tentacles and hair, ancient nobility and space-age explorer. Then he caught himself. What was he thinking? This was a disaster. The princess and a human? The complications alone were enough to give him a headache. The politics, the rules, the sheer impossibility of it all. And more importantly, he was done. He had fulfilled his promise to Kelrix. He had kept Brandon safe, mostly safe, accounting for self-inflicted berry incidents, and gotten him to the palace gathering. His job was over. Suyix cleared his throat.
I'll leave you two to it. Try not to eat anything poisonous tonight,
he added, looking pointedly at Brandon. No promises, Brandon said, but he was smiling, and he didn't look away from Aelara. Suyix walked away, weaving through the crowd of diplomats and nobles. He'd had enough of humans for a lifetime, maybe even 2 lifetimes. All he wanted now was to go home, take that bath he'd been dreaming about, and contact Kelrix about scheduling his vacation. Somewhere quiet, somewhere peaceful, somewhere very, very far away from anyone who thought deathberries were a good snack. Behind him, he could hear Aelara and Brandon laughing about something. The sound followed him out into the corridor, warm and genuine and utterly impossible. 4 days, Suyix reminded himself. He only had to survive 4 more days of this chaos. Then he could escape to his resort, lie on a beach somewhere, and forget that any of this ever happened. Though he had a feeling, a very strong feeling, that the story of the human who ate deathberries to impress a princess was going to follow him for a very long time.